Welcome, dreamers, to another journey through time's hidden corridors. I am your guide through the dreaming historian, where ancient mysteries whisper their secrets to those who dare to listen. Tonight, we venture into the lost city of Helike, Greece's own Atlantis, a city swallowed by the sea in a single night, leaving behind nothing but trembling legends and trembling earth. This is a tale where myth and memory intertwine beneath the waves, echoing through the centuries like distant thunder on an ancient shore. Before we embark on this mystical journey, if these whispers from the past resonate with your soul, let your presence be known through a gentle like, and join our circle of dreamers by subscribing for more nightly journeys into history's hidden realms. Share with us, fellow dreamers, from which corner of the world you are joining tonight's contemplation. Let our global community of mystery seekers connect across time zones as we drift together into the past. Now, settle into comfort, close your eyes, and let the ancient voices guide you into peaceful contemplation. In the quiet folds of northern Peloponnese, where the Gulf of Corinth cradles the land like a silvered mirror, once stood the shining city of Helike. The wind carried the scent of salt and pine. Olive trees twisted gently along the hills, and fishermen cast nets into waters that glittered beneath the noonday sun. This was a place kissed by gods and ruled by mortals. It thrived, unaware of its fate, like a candle dancing too brightly before the wind. The city's stones were warm beneath bare feet. Its streets curved in ancient logic, worn smooth by sandals and time. Markets bustled with wool and bronze, amphorae of olive oil and ceramic jugs of fermented honey wine. Laughter rang out beside the clang of iron and the cries of children chasing after goats. And presiding over it all was the god Poseidon, whose trident shimmered in every fountain, whose name was carved into lintels, whose temple rose white and silent like a crown at the city's heart. To walk through Helike was to move through layers of breath, of rhythm. Farmers in the surrounding hills brought offerings to the gods. Merchants came from Asia Minor and the Aegean Islands. Astronomers watched the stars from the heights, charting mysterious motions. The people believed they stood at the center of divine balance, where land met sea and heavens kissed the earth. But the gods are not always kind. Long before its fateful night, Helike had already attracted whispers. The sea would sometimes churn without warning, and the animals of the forests would suddenly migrate inland, leaving the fields eerily still. Priests said these were omens, but few listened. Prosperity brings forgetfulness. Helike was powerful, a leader among the Achaean League, and its people believed their city was eternal. Yet nature remembers, and the sea never sleeps. Historians believed Helike was founded in the Bronze Age, though its peak rose in the classical era around the 5th century before the Common Era. Its wealth was in its coastal position, its trade, its strong alliance with Delphi and the wider Hellenic world. The city minted its own coins, bearing the image of Poseidon, ruler of oceans and earthquakes. His presence was constant. His temple was vast, with marble columns and an altar where bulls were sacrificed and prayers were murmured under the stars. To the east, past vineyards and fig groves, was a sacred grove, and beyond that the sea wide moody, gleaming like a god's eye. It was this sea that would become Helike's tomb. The people of Helike were not unlike us. They feared hunger, prayed for rain, danced at weddings, and buried their dead with olive branches. Their myths bled into daily life where Poseidon could stir waves or bless hearts. Every spring a procession marched from the city to the shore, bringing offerings of flowers, honey, and barley soaked in wine. Children led the way, wearing wreaths of laurel. Priests followed, chanting hymns older than memory. And in that age, before clacks and concrete, the world itself spoke with warning. But to hear it required stillness, the kind of stillness Helike had forgotten. One evening, as the sun set in hues of amber and violet, the ground beneath the city trembled not violently, but like a sigh. Dogs howled, birds scattered from the trees. Fishermen claimed the sea had turned black beneath their boats, and deep in the temple of Poseidon, the sacred pool cracked along its base, letting the waters vanish into the earth. But still, the city slept. In the days that followed, strange things occurred. Herds of rats fled inland. Bees abandoned their hives. Shepherds spoke of lights dancing on the sea at night, cold and flickering, like lanterns held by unseen hands. The elders warned of Poseidon's wrath. Some said a sacrifice had been refused, that the god's statue had cried salt tears. Yet the magistrates scoffed. They had grain to store and coins to count. And so the night came. The sky was clear. Stars glittered like silver nails in velvet. Children fell asleep beneath wool blankets and lovers whispered beneath Far out on the water, dolphins circled unusually close to shore. A pulse moved through the ground. Then, with no warning, no crescendo of thunder, the earth split open beneath Helike. Buildings cracked and folded. The sea surged inland as if answering an ancient command. Walls fell like sand. The temple of Poseidon collapsed in silence, and then the waters rushed in, dragging marble, men, and memories beneath its cold surface. By morning Helike was gone. Only the tops of olive trees marked where once had stood a proud city. The land was drowned. Survivors, if any, were never found. Nearby towns whispered of divine punishment, of arrogance before the gods. Plato would later write of Atlantis, a mighty city swallowed by the sea. But long before his pen scratched those words, Helike had vanished beneath the waves, Greece's own drowned memory. For centuries, travelers spoke of ruins beneath the water, seen on clear days when the sea lay still. Fishermen cast nets and pulled up statues. Sailors said they heard singing beneath the waves. And yet, no one dared to dive deep. Helike became a myth, a warning, a whisper. But myths have roots, and memories leave traces. As we journey forward, we will follow those traces through ancient texts, through trembling ground, through the quiet work of archaeologists listening to time's echoes. For Helike does not sleep alone. And perhaps, in understanding her fall, we come closer to the balance between earth, sea, and sky. Let us now step deeper into the mystery. In the mythic hush that followed the drowning of Helike, a shadow lingered on the waters. It was not the kind of shadow cast by sunlight, blocked by form, but the echo of a god's gaze, heavy and watching. The ancient Greeks had no doubt whose hand stirred the earth and summoned the sea. It was Poseidon, lord of oceans and earthquakes, whose wrath had claimed the city by the sea. Yet the reasons were obscured by time, draped in silence, like a veil of fog over a forgotten shore. Poseidon, the earth-shaker, to the people of Helike was both protector and destroyer. Their allegiance was deep. His temple stood at the city's center like a beating heart carved in marble. Coins bore his likeness. Prayers rose to him on winds and waves. The city owed its wealth to his domain trade ships, fish, sea winds, and so they worshipped him not with fear, but with pride. Perhaps too much pride, but ancient gods are not comforters. They are forces primordial, immense, neither cruel nor kind. Their blessings come with consequences. Their silence can thunder. The priesthood of Helike knew this. They guarded the rites with precision passed down through generations. They knew the sacred hymns, the offerings, the cycles of the stars that guided the gods' favor. But something, perhaps, was broken. An offering missed a rite performed with arrogance, or perhaps Poseidon's anger had nothing to do with the city at all. Sometimes, the sea reclaims what it lent. In the tales told by neighboring cities after Helike's fall, Poseidon's vengeance became legend. They spoke of a trident thrust into the earth, splitting stone and soil. They said the god's voice had been heard above the waves, lamenting a broken pact. Some even claimed he walked the streets in human guise days before the quake, a tall man with storm-colored eyes, warning of what would come. But these were stories, and yet they carried a truth deeper than fact. The Greeks understood the world through divine will. Each natural event, every harvest, every storm was a message, and the loss of Helike, so sudden and complete, could only be explained by divine judgment. There was no other way to make sense of such silence, such finality. In Delphi, the oracle was said to have wept upon hearing the news. She spoke of balance undone, of sea and stone in conflict, of Poseidon's trident striking deep not only into the land, but into the memory of men. And still, the sea did not speak. It swallowed Helike whole. It left no survivors, no witnesses, just a still lagoon where once had been roads and rooftops, just reeds where once stood statues, just silence where once there was song. In time, the shadow of Poseidon extended beyond Helike. Philosophers like Heraclitus would ponder the transience of all things. Even Plato, writing a century later, wove a tale of Atlantis, a great and proud civilization swallowed by the sea, a mirror of Helike's fate, though placed in mythic lands. Some scholars believe Helike was the seed of that tale. Others believe Atlantis and Helike were echoes of the same archetype, the drowned city, the punishment for pride, the reminder that beneath all human glory lies trembling earth. Archaeologists now believe the fault line beneath the Gulf of Corinth is one of Greece's most volatile. Helike may have sat precisely on a wound in the earth's crust, a place where Poseidon's footsteps left scars. It was not the first time he stirred the land, nor would it be the last. In modern excavations, geologists have found soil layers distorted by sudden upheaval, liquefied mud, drowned olive groves, shattered foundations. These are Poseidon's fingerprints. The science may now speak of tectonics, of subduction and seismic waves, but the myth remains truer in spirit. For the earth did shake, the sea did rise, and a god's name was whispered in the dark. Poseidon's temple was not only a place of worship, it was also a place of stories. Travelers and poets came to Helike to witness the grandeur of his cult. The statue inside was massive, forged of bronze, the god astride his horses, the sea crashing around his form. Offerings from distant lands were left at his feet, shells from Egypt, amber from the Baltic, silver from Iberia, and yet, when the city fell, all of it vanished beneath the waves. Some said the statue still stands, deep under the water, Poseidon's bronze face frozen in eternal judgment. Others claimed that divers heard strange sounds beneath the waves, low humming tones like ancient chanting. Perhaps they heard only their own breath, echoing in the hollows of time. The shadow of Poseidon was not only geological or mythic, it was also psychological. After Helike's fall, Coastal cities across Greece began to build farther inland. New temples were erected with higher steps. Rituals to Poseidon increased in the god's favor had to be regained. The balance had to be restored. But the sea remembers, and beneath it Helike waited. For nearly 23 centuries, no one found her. The city's location became a ghost on old maps, a footnote in ancient texts. Sailors said you could see ruins beneath the waves on calm days. Pliny the Elder wrote of a city drowned and visible in the shallows. But still, no one could point to it. And as centuries passed, Helike became legend. Yet legend is not loss. In the late 20th century, a team of Greek archaeologists, led by the persistent spirit of Dora Katsonopoulou, began to search not in the sea, but inland. Guided by ancient texts and new science, they found strange sediment patterns, hints of and then, in the fields near the modern village of Rhizomylos, they unearthed bronze coins bearing Poseidon's trident. Roads emerged beneath plowed soil. Walls, once submerged, came back to light. Helike was not in the sea. It had been buried beneath layers of mud and time, just beyond the current coastline, reclaimed first by water, then by earth. The god's shadow had not only fallen over the sea, but over our understanding. Helike was never truly lost. She had simply been sleeping. And as we continue this journey, we will walk beside the archaeologists, through the mud and mystery. We will uncover what remains of the drowned city. We will listen not just to science, but to the whispers beneath it, the myth and the method, the shadow and the light. For Poseidon still watches, and beneath his trident lies more than ruin. There lies memory. Before the silence, there were sounds. Before the drowning, there were murmurs, strange tremors that moved through root and rock. The story of Helike is not only one of sudden destruction, but of signs overlooked, of omens unheeded, of a city so immersed in its own rhythm that it failed to hear the discord beneath. In the ancient world, the earth was a living thing. To the people of Helike, earthquakes were not merely shifts in stone. They were expressions of mood, divine discontent stirred into motion. When the ground trembled, it was not tectonics they feared, but the god beneath, stirring in sleep or waking in fury. And in the final days before Helike was swallowed, the land spoke. It began subtly. Animals acted strangely. Dogs howled not at the moon, but at the sea. Birds flew inland in great numbers, abandoning nests along the coast. Fishermen found their nets empty, though the waters had been abundant only days before. Strange lights, flickering like spectral lanterns, were seen dancing over the water after dusk. Shepherds claimed to hear distant thuds beneath the soil, like muffled drums from the underworld. But daily life continued. Markets opened. Prayers were whispered. Ceremonies were held. People noticed the signs, but they didn't understand them or perhaps didn't want to. Prosperity has a way of drowning prophecy. Comfort, silences, warnings. Some among the priesthood took note. In the temple of Poseidon, a crack had appeared across the marble threshold. Sacred oil spilled inexplicably from an altar basin. On the night of the summer solstice, the statue of the god was said to have shifted ever so slightly, its bronze foot no longer aligned with the pedestal markings etched centuries before. One priest, a man named Timon, wrote in a now-lost scroll that the sea breathes unnaturally, as if preparing to speak. His records, later quoted by philosophers of Corinth, describe a sense of waiting that gripped the city. Not fear, but something deeper, a stillness between heartbeats. Modern science would later describe these precursors in different terms: foreshocks, soil liquefaction, electromagnetic anomalies. But to Helike's people, it was the world itself becoming uncanny, familiar rhythms slipping just enough to raise the hair on the neck, to whisper of things to come. Then came the trembling, not a great quake at first, but a series of subtle rumbles. Buildings groaned as if stretching in sleep. Columns creaked. Crockery fell from shelves. But there was no collapse, only the sensation that the city was being stirred. Beneath the soil, something was shifting. The sea began to withdraw ever so slightly, as though in the philosophers of Helike, adherents of Pythagorean mysticism and early natural philosophy, debated the signs. Some believed the alignment of stars over the gulf had become unbalanced. Others pointed to the movement of the moon, the rise of tides. Yet others insisted it was Poseidon alone, displeased with a recent defiance by the city's council. Rumors circulated that a delegation from Delphi had been turned away without proper offering. Perhaps the cause did not matter. What mattered was that the land was restless. One shepherd, decades later, would tell his grandson of the nights before the wave. He remembered the goats refusing to drink from the wells, the snakes that fled the groves. He remembered lying awake and hearing no crickets, no frogs, only the distant whisper of reeds brushing together, though there was no wind. It was as if the city was holding its breath. And then came the dreamers. A curious phenomenon unfolded in the final nights. People across Helike reported strange dreams, of water rising inside their homes, of walking through flooded streets, of Poseidon himself reaching down with a hand made of lightning and foam. The dreams were not identical, but they shared a tonominous wet, suffocating, a collective subconscious opening itself to the tide of fate. One woman, a healer named Dee, claimed she awoke with wet hair and sand beneath her fingernails. though she had not left her bed. Her vision, recorded in a later hymn, spoke of a light beneath the sea, and voices calling from beneath the stones. She warned the council. She was laughed away. Even children sensed something. They began playing different games, no longer pretending to be heroes or kings, but sea creatures, ghosts, waves. They built cities in the sand only to destroy them moments later, laughing as the tide swept them away. Some say they were reenacting what they saw in sleep. The night before the destruction, the animals vanished. Dogs tore at leashes. Cattle broke through fences. Cats mewed and disappeared into the hills. The entire coastal plain felt empty, though every home was filled. There are records scattered, fragmented, of a final feast, a wedding held near the port. The guests danced beneath torchlight. Wine flowed. The sea lay still, reflecting the stars as if it too were listening. And then came the wind. It arrived in silence, strong and strange. It moved through the city not as a breeze, but as a current. Doors slammed, tapestries flooded, flames and lamps bowed low. Fishermen said they smelled salt where there should have been cedar. A single boat, tied at the dock, pulled against its moorings, straining toward the open gulf as though summoned. Some now believe the signs were more than natural, that the earth itself attempted to warn Helike. That ancient tectonic wisdom, older than civilization, was speaking in the language of animals and dreams. Modern seismologists studying the Gulf of Corinth have confirmed that the region lies along a complex and volatile rift zone. Earthquakes there can cause a phenomenon known as subsidence, the sudden sinking of land due to soil distance. Combine this with a potential undersea landslide, and the recipe for a sudden flood becomes not only possible, but probable. And yet, there remains a mystery. Why Helike? Why then? Why so completely? These are questions that tremble at the edge of knowing. For while science offers, because it does not always offer meaning, the ancients lived within the fabric of both. They did not divide the world into natural and supernatural. To them, a dream could be a warning. A whisper in the reeds could carry the voice of a god. And so the warning signs became part of the legend, not just of Helike's end, but of its message, that even in prosperity, even in power, one must listen to the ground, to the wind, to the stillness that falls before the sea reclaims what it once cradled. As we move into the heart of this journey, let us remember the signs. Let us listen with the ears of the ancient. Let us see with the eyes of those who once believed the earth to be alive. Because sometimes it is after the sea had swallowed Helike, after the cries had faded and the land had gone still, only memory remained. But even memory, like footprints on a shore, is washed away if left untended. And yet, somehow, the tale of Helike endured not as a chronicle carved in stone, but as a whisper carried by tides and tongues, drifting across time. For centuries, the city lay hidden. No one rebuilt it. No new settlements rose above the ruins. The land was left fallow, a scar upon the earth where prosperity had once bloomed. It was as if Helike had been not only destroyed but erased. Its very absence became a presence of void that spoke louder than monuments. But memory has its own rhythm. It lingers in story, in superstition, in the shape of stones beneath the soil. The neighboring cities of Achaea remembered Helike with a mixture of reverence and fear. Children were warned not to wander too far down the old paths toward the drowned fields. Sailors were told to steer wide around the shallows, for the sea there was restless. Some claimed to hear voices at night, murmured chants, laughter, weeping. Others said strange lights flickered just below the surface, like fireflies trapped in glass. The memory of Helike became mythic, not merely a city lost to natural disaster, but a place touched by divine retribution. Some said it was the Greek Atlantis. Others believed it was cursed ground, a warning etched into the seabed by Poseidon himself. But myths, though blurred, often preserved the outlines of truth. The philosopher Eratosthenes, writing 3 centuries after Helike's fall, recorded fragments of testimony. He wrote of fishermen who claimed their nets had caught pieces of bronze statues, of divers who glimpsed streets beneath the waves, of coin hoards bearing Poseidon's trident found far inland, carried there, perhaps by floodwaters, or by hands seeking to preserve something before the end. Roman authors, too, kept the memory alive. Strabo, the geographer, wrote of Helike as a sunken city still visible in the sea during calm weather. Pliny the Elder called it a marvel of nature and a lesson in humility. They had never seen it with their own eyes, but the story had woven itself into the cultural fabric of the Mediterranean, an enduring symbol of sudden ruin. Even in the absence of ruins, the memory persisted. Why? Perhaps because Helike represented more than a city. It was an idea, a warning, a mirror held up to civilization. The knowledge that, no matter how grand our temples, how fine our coins, how confident our power, everything rests upon the trembling patience of the earth. And so the drowned city lived on in poetry and parable. In the 1st century BCE, a traveler from Asia Minor wrote in his journal that, while sailing the Gulf of Corinth at dusk, he saw what appeared to be roads beneath the water, straight lines of stone, far too orderly to be natural. He lowered a lantern into the sea, and for a moment, thought he saw columns, half buried in silt, rising like ghosts. His companions laughed, but he never forgot the image. Over the centuries, earthquakes continued to rattle the region. The land shifted, coastlines crept inland or receded, rivers changed course, and slowly Helike sank not only into the sea, but into the layers of sediment laid down by time. The city became a geological memory, one that would remain sealed until science caught up to legend. But the story never truly died. In local villages, songs were passed down, ballads of the drowned bride of Helike, lullabies about the waves that wept. Farmers plowing fields near the coast would sometimes strike stone, or dig up shards of pottery unlike anything from their own era. They would speak of the ancients beneath them. They would nod toward the sea and mutter prayers to Poseidon, just in case. Helike had become a myth with a pulse. It inspired philosophers, including those in the early schools of Alexandria and Athens. The city's fate became a case study in The Stoics cited it when speaking of fate and the illusion of control. The Epicureans referenced it to highlight the random cruelty of nature. Even Christian writers in late antiquity used Helike as a metaphor for divine punishment and moral decay. But beneath all these layers, something older remained, a sense of loss not entirely explainable, as though something sacred had been taken, not just a city, but a memory of balance between land and sea, man and God, presence and humility. The drowned city haunted the imagination of Europe well into the Renaissance. Cartographers drew vague outlines on their maps, labeling parts of the Gulf of Corinth as Helike. Poets invoked the image of the sunken polis, its statues still standing in the depths, corroded by salt and time. In the 1700s, traveling antiquarians attempted to locate the city. They brought with them scrolls, myths, compasses, and a yearning to connect legend to land. But they found only marshes, reeds, and the moody sea. One wrote in his diary, Helike eludes us still, as if she waits for us to understand her, not merely find her. And perhaps that was always the purpose of memory, not to preserve every detail, but to carry the essence, to remind, to haunt gently. The Greeks called this kind of remembrance mnemosynia, sacred memory that exists not in facts, but in feeling, a ripple through generations, a shiver of recognition when standing at a shore you've never seen before, and yet somehow know. In this way, Helike was never lost. She was simply submerged, not only by water but by time, by silence, by the failure of our listening. But the tide, as ever, returns. In the coming chapters we will walk alongside those who sought to hear her again, archaeologists, and poets who refused to let the drowned memory vanish, who believed that within the mud and myth, something waited, not just ruins, but revelation. For more than 2,000 years Helike lay in waiting, hidden not beneath a foreign sea or on a lost continent, but close to where it had once stood in pride. And yet, it remained unfound, forgotten by the maps, bypassed by scholars, dismissed as legend. But memory is a living current, and some feel its pull more strongly than others. In the late 20th century, in a modern Greece still steeped in echoes of its past, a quiet resurgence of curiosity stirred. The myths of Helike had never truly died. They had trickled through village stories and academic footnotes, through folk songs and faded chronicles, and there were those who wondered what if the myth still breathed beneath the soil. Enter Dora. She was not a wanderer or mystic, but a scholar with the soul of both. A Greek archaeologist born near the very lands where Helike once thrived, she carried with her not just tools of science, but a reverence for myth, the kind of reverence that allows questions to remain open, the kind of mind that listens. In the 1980s, as she pored over ancient texts and pieced together faint cartographic hints, Katsanopoulos began to ask, what if the search for Helike had been looking in the wrong direction all along? Previous explorations had focused on the sea. Divers had combed the Gulf of Corinth, believing Helike must rest beneath its surface. After all, ancient texts had said the city was submerged. Travelers had spoken of ruins glimpsed beneath calm waves. But the sea had shifted. The coastline had changed. Rivers had flooded and receded over millennia. The land was not still. It breathed. Katsanopoulos and her team turned inland. They began to study the sedimentary history of the region near the delta of the Selinus River. What they found was remarkable. Layer upon layer of riverine deposits indicated sudden and massive floods. Beneath these, more ancient layers marked by pottery fragments, structural anomalies, and soil disturbances hinted at something older, something buried. A new theory began to emerge. What if Helike had indeed been submerged not by the sea in the modern sense, but by an inland tsunami triggered by a powerful earthquake? What if the sea had rushed in, inundated the city, and then, over centuries, the land had silted over it again, covering the drowned city with a blanket of mud? It was a bold thought, and it required proof. In the early 2000s, systematic excavations began in the coastal plain near the village of just a few kilometers from the Corinthian Gulf. The earth here was fertile. Vineyards and olive trees grew over what had once been temples and homes. With patient hands and gentle brushes, the archaeologists began to uncover secrets long asleep. First, it was pottery distinctly classical in design, painted with sea creatures and mythic figures. Then came coins bearing the unmistakable trident of Poseidon, the symbol unique to Helike's mint. These were not random finds, they were signatures. Ghosts returning to speak. Then, in a deeper trench, something extraordinary. Walls, not the ruins of a farmhouse or a shrine, but the outline of a city grid. Streets, deliberately planned, paved with ancient stone, foundation blocks for buildings long gone. Evidence of civic planning, evidence of Helike. It was as if the earth had simply rolled a curtain of silt over the city, tucking it into dreamless sleep. As word spread, the world turned its attention. Scholars arrived from across Europe. Geological experts analyzed core samples. Remote sensing technologies were deployed to scan beneath the topsoil. And the more they looked, the more they found. Helike had not vanished into myth. It had been buried within it. The site yielded not only classical remains, but deeper layers from earlier centuries. Mycenaean pottery, even hints of Bronze Age structures, suggested the city's roots went further back than most had believed. This was not just the recovery of a lost city, it was the unlocking of an entire forgotten chronology. What made the search so powerful was its dual nature. On one hand, there was the rigorous science, seismic models, hydrological reconstructions, carbon dating. On the other, there was the myth, pulsing like an undertone through every artifact. The team excavated with the knowledge that they were peeling back not just layers of earth, but layers of story. At night, under the open Greek sky, some workers said the trenches seemed to breathe, that the air carried a different quality where the ruins lay exposed. One volunteer claimed to hear the faint sound of chanting juice to the edge of perceptionists. She walked the perimeter of the excavation. Science made no comment, but the legend watched. In time, Katunopulo and her team confirmed what no one had dared to say for centuries. Helike had been found, not beneath the open sea, but beneath river mud and orchard. Just beyond reach, and yet always present. It was not Atlantis. It was not a place of winged chariots or impossible towers. It was a real city, a place of trade and worship, laughter and labor, a place where people once watched sunsets and whispered prayers. And it had fallen not by hubris or divine fire, but by the quiet violence of earth and water. And yet, in its fall, it had become something more. It had become a lesson, a mirror held to time itself. For in Helike's rediscovery, we are reminded that history is not a straight line. It spirals, it folds, it hides. And when we truly listen, we may yet hear the pulse of those who came before. As we move forward, deeper into the streets of the uncovered city, let us walk with reverence. Let us remember that to uncover the past is not merely to find but to listen, to understand, to kneel beside the bones of memory and whisper, "We hear you now." For Helike has spoken, and we are ready to hear. Beneath the olive groves and sun-drenched vineyards of modern Archaea, a silence once slept, layered in silt and centuries. It was the silence of streets long forgotten, where sandals once scuffed the stone and market stalls bustled with the fragrant noise of daily life. But as the archaeologists brushed aside the soil with their slow and reverent hands, that silence began to lift. And what emerged was not merely the ruin of Helike, it was the breath of a city waking from an ancient dream. The first streets they uncovered were narrow, yet deliberate, paved with flagstones still smooth from the passage of time. They curved through the outline of what once had been a thriving polis. Here was a drainage channel, carved in a careful arc to guide water away from the houses. There, a foundation wall 2 meters thick, perhaps belonging to a public building. Even now, the layout spoke of order, of intent, of a people who knew how to live beside the sea. The archaeologists moved slowly, as one must when dealing with time's most delicate remnants. Soil was sifted by hand. Every shard of pottery, every fragment of tile, every coin was catalogued, measured, photographed. To excavate Helike was not simply to remove earth, it was to translate a language of silence. The streets revealed more than stone. They told stories. Along one pathway, lined with what may have been homes, they found a cluster of ampheres still upright, their necks sealed with wax hardened by centuries. Chemical analysis would later reveal traces of olive oil and wine still clinging to the inner walls. A pantry, perhaps caught in a moment that never moved forward, preserved by catastrophe, stilled by the wave. In another area, partially buried in alluvium, the broken pediment of a shrine emerged. It bore an inscription worn but legible, a dedication to Poseidon rendered in Doric script. Nearby, fragments of bronze fittings, perhaps from a chariot or ceremonial cart. All around were signs of life interrupted. The absence of human remains struck many of the For all the devastation Helike suffered, very few bodies had been found. This deepened the mystery. Had the citizens fled? Had they heard the signs? Or had the wave carried them elsewhere, beyond the borders of recovery? The question hovered, unanswered. Like so many in ancient history, the truth resided in absence. As the excavation continued, the city's skeleton revealed itself with greater clarity. Public spaces emerged, wide intersections that may have held markets or civic gatherings. A rectangular structure with steps suggested a stoa, where philosophers or traders may have gathered. There were courtyards paved in patterned stone, a narrow chamber with a small altar, perhaps for household worship. Beneath one layer, older still, signs of Mycenaean habitation. Helike, it seemed, was a city written over itself again and again, classical over archaic, archaic over Bronze Age, each generation leaving its breath upon the stone. To walk through these streets now, one needed imagination and humility. There were no towering ruins or intact temples. Time had worn the edges. The sea and soil had not been kind, but there was something else, something more precious than grandeur. There was intimacy. The walls stood low, but their lines still whispered of doorways, hearths, and shaded porticos. The pathways curved with purpose. The city had not been chaotic. It had been lived and loved. Even in one area, they found a child's toy, a simple clay figurine, shaped like a horse, with small wheels at the base. It had been tucked beneath a fallen lintel, preserved in darkness. It was not a treasure by the standards of gold or art, but it brought the past nearer than any monument could. For in that tiny horse was a child's joy, a hand that once gripped it, perhaps just before the wave came, a life whose name had been lost, but whose echo survived in clay. Such discoveries moved the team deeply. Katsanapula, often reserved and scientific in her reporting, noted in one journal entry that Helike does not rise with grandeur. In her fragments she is whole. As they mapped the uncovered grid, a city plan began to form. The roads followed a pattern similar to other Archean cities. Yet there was a uniqueness to Helike's footprint: its proximity to the sea, the density of religious spaces, the evidence of trade connections, and the variety of artifacts found. Pottery shards bore designs from Athens, Crete, even southern Italy. This was not a provincial outpost. Helike had been a node in the vast web of ancient commerce and belief. Even the stones themselves seemed to speak. Many bore tool marks from quarry and chisels in rhythmic patterns. Some were shaped to interlock without mortar, a testament to architectural skill. Others had been reused, showing signs of prior inscription erased or inverted. The builders of Helike had known resourcefulness. They built not only for beauty, but for continuity. As the seasons passed, the excavation expanded. Tents were erected over fragile areas. Walkways were built to allow visitors to glimpse the rebirth. Students from around the world came to dig and learn. And in the evenings, after the tools were laid down and the sun painted the hills in amber and wine, the team would sit among the ruins and share stories, old myths, modern dreams. One night, during a summer solstice, the wind shifted inland, heavy with the scent of salt. Someone remarked how the stars above seemed to shimmer more brightly over the old city. Another nodded. "Maybe," she said softly, "it's because they remember too." The streets of Helike Island for millennia had become paths once more, not for merchants or magistrates, but for memory, for reverence. And in walking them, we come to understand that the past is not a place we leave behind. It is a room within us, a chamber of quiet echoes. And every step we take in such places is a conversation between our time and theirs. As we press onward in this journey, we will explore the deeper mystery of Helike's fall, the moment when the streets fell silent, when the water came, when the city was no longer a city, but a story. For the streets beneath the earth lead not only backward but inward. It began, as many endings do, in silence, a silence not of peace, but a breath held, of nature paused. The birds no longer sang, the insects ceased their buzzing in the fields. The waves on the Gulf of Corinth lay oddly still, as if the sea itself waited. And beneath the fertile plains of Achaia the earth drew in a slow, invisible breath. Then came the trembling, not the distant rumble of a storm, but a deep, internal growl like something ancient stirring far below. At first it was only felt by the roots and stones, but soon it rose like a tide, pressing against the city's foundations, against temple and home. The soil shifted, the olive trees swayed, though no wind moved their silver leaves. In the heart of Helike the ground shuddered. Cups fell from tables, statues trembled upon their plinths. In the great temple of Poseidon, the hanging bronze lamps swung like pendulums, crashing against marble. The sacred pool split open, its still waters vanishing downward into a crack that seemed to stretch toward the center of the world. Panicked shouts filled the streets. Doors flung open. Families spilled into the courtyards. Livestock screamed and bolted. The tremor intensified. Walls cracked. Roofs buckled. And through the dust that rose like smoke, the people of Helike saw something unthinkable. The sea was moving toward them. A wave, but not a wave in the way we know them, not a crest of white foam gently rising. This was a wall, a surge of black water born from the deep, drawn not by wind or storm, but by a shift in the bones of the earth itself. The seabed had lifted, then fallen. A submarine landslide, perhaps, triggered by the violent quake. Whatever the cause, the result was a mass of water set in motion with the weight of mountains. It came without mercy. The river that wound around the city reversed course, sucked backward toward the incoming surge. The air filled with a roar like 10,000 drums, deep and unrelenting. Some fled uphill. Others froze in their doorways. A few tried to gather their families and run, but the ground continued to move, cracking open in deep fissures that swallowed stone and soil alike. And then the waves struck. The sea poured into the city not as flood, but as fury. Temples crumbled. Market stalls vanished. Columns fell like broken fingers. The temple of Poseidon, proud and pale in the moonlight, was the last to be seen, its marble portico torn away as the waters rose over it, reclaiming the god's altar in a cruel, sacred tide. In less than an hour, Helike was no more. Where once had been roads and laughter, now there was a lagoon, quiet still, as if the sea had exhaled and gone back to sleep. The night sky, unshaken, continued to turn. In nearby villages, those who had seen the glow on the horizon, who felt the tremors and heard the roaring wind, stood at the edge of their own homes and watched. Some would write of it, some would pass a tale to children, others would forget, or try to. The disaster was complete. No survivors were recorded, no exodus marked in stone. The city had not been conquered, nor burned, nor eroded by time. It had been removed in a single motion, not by armies, but by the elements themselves, by the breath of the earth. And yet, in its silence, Helike spoke volumes. To the ancients, it was Poseidon's vengeance, divine fury against a city that had perhaps grown too proud, too forgetful of the gods, too modern science. It was a perfect storm of tectonic volatility, seismic liquefaction, and hydrological violence. Both views circle the same truth: the power of the world to change in an instant. Helike's destruction was recorded by contemporaries with awe and fear. The philosopher Heraclides wrote that the city vanished as though swallowed by a mouth in the sea. The historian Diodorus called it a warning sent to the Greeks. The event was not just a tragedy. It became a symbol, and perhaps the seed of something larger. A century after the wave, Plato would describe Atlantis, a mighty empire that defied the gods and was destroyed in a single night. Though his tale was allegorical, many have wondered, did he know of Helike? Was her fate whispered through scrolls and songs reshaped into legend? The timeline is suggestive. Plato lived in the shadow of Helike's memory. His world had felt the tremors. The story was alive in his time. It would not be unreasonable to think that Helike's fall stirred the philosophical imagination. For Atlantis, like Helike, represents not merely loss but hubris, the forgetting of one's place within the sacred order. And so, the trembling of the earth became more than a geologic event. It became a parable. In the centuries that followed, the lagoon slowly filled with silt. The river returned to its path. New fields were planted. The name Helike faded from the lips of men, but the memory remained beneath the soil, buried. Yes, but not gone. And the trembling echoes persisted. Seismologists now know the region is part of a dynamic fault zone. The land is restless. The earth still shifts. Modern buildings rise with earthquake resistance, built upon ground that once opened its jaw to swallow a city. Each tremor is a reminder. Each quake is a whisper. Helike is not merely a story of destruction. It is a story of remembrance, of humility before nature, of a city that lived brightly, fell swiftly, and spoke across centuries. As we move forward, we will follow that whisper through the science, through the soul of those who refuse to forget. Because when the earth trembles, it is not only buildings that fall, it is illusions. Long after Helike sank beneath the weight of water and silence, another city rose, not from the earth, but from the imagination. A city of rings and temples, of golden walls and vast canals, glowing in the mind's eye like a beacon from another age. Its name was Atlantis. Plato first wrote of it in Timaeus and Critias, dialogues that shimmer at the border between myth and philosophy. He described a mighty civilization that defied the natural order and was punished by the gods. In a single night and day of misfortune, Atlantis was swallowed by the sea, vanishing forever from the realm of man. The world has chased Atlantis ever since. But perhaps the search has always looked too far outward, near the wide Atlantic, beneath polar ice, across deserts and distant continents. For if we draw closer, if we turn our eyes to the familiar waters of the Mediterranean, we find a quieter echo. Not a utopia, but a warning. Not a myth, but a memory. The similarities between Atlantis and Helike are haunting. Both were prosperous cities. Both were destroyed in a single cataclysmic event involving the sea. Both were said to have angered the divine, and both left behind only traces. Plato lived around 427 to 347 BCE. Helike vanished in 373 BCE. When he was a young man, the event was fresh, raw, whispered across the city-states of Greece. Travelers would have spoken of it. Priests may have read it as omen. Philosophers, ever attuned to the meanings beneath phenomena, would surely have pondered its moral gravity. Was Plato inspired by Helike? It seems more than possible. His dialogues place Atlantis outside the pillars of what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, but this may have been literary positioning. What mattered to Plato was not geography, but allegory. Atlantis was a mirror, a symbol of a civilization that forgot its place in the cosmos, just as Helike may have. But unlike Atlantis, Helike was real. Its coins can be held, its stones can be walked, its shrines, once submerged, have risen again beneath the fingers of archaeologists and dreamers. It is proof that cities do fall, that myths are sometimes rooted in soil and sediment. Plato's Atlantis was described with impossible fountains of warm and cold water, walls plated in brass, tin, and orichalcum Helike. But it had its own richness. The gleam of Poseidon's trident on coin, the white curve of temple columns, the laughter of markets, the scent of figs in the sun. And it had pride. Both cities, real or imagined, shared a fatal trait: forgetfulness, not of memory, but of place. In the ancient worldview, balance was sacred. Harmony between man and God, between land and sea, between what is made and what is meant to be. When that balance faltered, catastrophe followed. Atlantis and Helike may be two expressions of the same truth, one in metaphor, the other in mud. In recent decades, scholars have begun to examine this connection more seriously. They note that the destruction of Helike fits many of the themes in Plato's account: sudden devastation, divine anger, the sea as instrument of judgment. Even the absence of survivors fits the archetype. Cities erased, not only in structure, but in voice. But there is a deeper echo still. In both tales, the city beneath the sea becomes more powerful than the one on the surface. Helike in its silence draws us nearer than it ever did in its glory. And Atlantis, despite never having existed in stone, continues to shape imagination, philosophy, and longing. They have both become thresholds. To dream of Atlantis is to long for a golden past. To remember Helike is to kneel before the present moment. One is aspiration, the other, reflection. And perhaps they are both necessary. We need the glimmer of the impossible. We need the warning of the real. Helike reminds us that cities can vanish, that the world can shift in a breath, that prosperity is not permanence. It speaks through sediment, through broken pottery, through coins tarnished by brine. It speaks through the absences on ancient maps. And it speaks through Plato, whose Atlantis may well be a philosophical ghost of Helike, reshaped in mythic proportions. Some modern archaeologists resist the idea. They argue that Plato's Atlantis was entirely fictional, drawn from Egyptian stories or invented whole cloth to serve his teachings. Others believe it was a composite fusion of memory, legend, and cautionary fable. Yet the timing is uncanny. Helike's destruction preceded Timaeus by mere decades. And so, the echo rings, not in exact detail, but in resonance. To walk through the exposed streets of Helike today is to feel that echo. The sea is no longer pressing in. The earth is comfort now. But the memory is alive. It trembles just beneath the dust. Atlantis may never be found, but Helike is. And in finding it, we see not just a city, but ourselves, our fragility, our forgetting, and our yearning to remember. As we journey deeper into the story, we will follow how this echo-shaped thought, religion, and the idea of lost worlds. For Helike did not only inspire Plato, it stirred the roots of a long tradition. The sunken city as symbol, as warning, as mirror. In the end, perhaps every civilization leaves behind two legacies: the one it builds in stone, and the one it casts in shadow. Long after the waters had reclaimed Helike, after the temple columns were pulled down by the tide and the streets lay buried beneath layers of silt, the sea gave something back. Small, round, shining tokens tossed by waves onto distant shores, dredged up by fishermen's nets, or discovered gleaming faintly in the mud like forgotten stars. Coins simple, yet profound. Each one bore the unmistakable mark of the city that had once minted them. Poseidon's trident, not as an abstract symbol but as a declaration. These were coins not only of commerce, but of enduring proclamations that this was Helike, the city of the sea god. In antiquity, coins were more than currency. They were miniature messages, carried from hand to hand, market to market, across valleys and seas. They bore images of rulers, of gods, of myths. They told the world who you were and to whom you gave reverence. And in the case of Helike it was unmistakable. Poseidon ruled here. The silver coins of Helike were distinctive. On one side, the fierce trident, its tines flaring like lightning. On the other, the inscription of the city's name in archaic script, sometimes accompanied by the god himself in seated majesty or striding power. Even centuries after the city vanished, these coins remained. Travelers from as far as Ionia and Sicily recorded finding them in the strangest places, buried in sand dunes, wedged in temple floors, or kept as talismans by sailors who believed they carried the blessing of the sea. To find one was to touch the breath of a lost world. Modern archaeologists treasure these coins not for their material value, but for their voice. Each one offers a trace of Helike's reach. They prove the city traded far and wide, that its economy pulsed with energy. They show stylistic evolution, changes in weight, in minting, precision marking the passage of generations before the fall. But more than that, they are emblems of memory. It is said that the first rediscovery of Helike's location began with coins, in the fields near Isomillas before any formal excavation began. Local farmers reported finding strange silver discs while tilling their soil. At first they were curiosities, cleaned with water and pocketed with little ceremony. But then came the trident. Repeatedly, over and over, the god's symbol emerging from earth that had not been disturbed for millennia. When researchers examined these finds, the mystery deepened. How could such an abundance of Helican coinage be found inland, miles from the supposed drowned ruins in the Gulf? The answer lay not in the sea, but in sediment. Over centuries, the landscape had changed. Rivers shifted, earthquakes altered topography. What had once been coast had become plain. The sea had reached further in those days, and when it withdrew, it left behind not only destruction, but evidence. The coins were the city's last voice before silence. They led archaeologists to the buried streets. They became markers on the invisible map of time. In trench after trench, more emerged, sometimes whole, sometimes clipped or pierced, used as adornment or perhaps offerings. One was found beneath a corner of a crumbled hearth, suggesting it may have been placed as a ritual blessing during construction, a coin for the god of the sea, protecting a home built within his gaze. Poseidon's trident, etched in silver, remained sharp even after 23 centuries beneath the ground. There is something poetic in this, that a symbol meant to command the oceans would survive the ocean's fury, that in the delicate strike of a minting die a city could leave behind not just economy, but soul. The coins of Helike are not loud, they are not grand. They do not sing with the bombast of epics. They whisper, and in that whisper, they carry memory. The ancients understood this. In many Greek cities, coins were placed with the dead held in the hand, under the tongue, upon the chest. They were meant to pay Charon the ferryman for passage across the river of souls. But perhaps they were more than payment. Perhaps they were also proof tokens of identity, of origin, a sign that even in death, one came from somewhere, from a polis, from a story, from hell. To hold one now is to feel that story beneath your fingers, to sense the weight of what was lost and what survived. These coins crossed centuries. They weathered salt and stone, and they waited not in vaults, but in soil. Today, some are housed in museums, in Athens, in Patras, in private collections guided by care and reverence. Others still emerge. A fisherman off the coast of Iagen once found one caught in the shell of a sea urchin. Another was unearthed during the planting of grapevines, its trident etched with uncanny clarity, as if freshly struck. Some modern jewelers, inspired by the find, create root. They sell them as pendant silver odes to the sea. And while these may shine with polish, they lack the true resonance. For it is not the image that matters. It is the journey, the silence it endured, the story it continued to carry. The real coins are not artifacts. They are echoes. And Poseidon, in his strange mercy, allowed them to remain. As we press forward in our journey, we will look to the temple once, the city's spiritual heart. We will follow the trail of these coins to the altar where they were first offered, where prayers once rose like incense into the sea wind. For even in silence Helike speaks, and in silver she remembers. Before the sea came, before the trembling earth tore the city asunder, there was a temple. It stood at the heart of Helike like a great white anchor, binding land and spirit, man and god. Marble columns rose from a platform of stone quarried from the inland hills, shaped and placed by hands long vanished. Above, a frieze of myth, dolphins leaping at his side, storms swirling in tribute told, the story of power that dwelled beneath the sea. This was not just architecture, it was reverence carved into form. The temple of Poseidon in Helike was among the most sacred sanctuaries to the god in the Greek world. Some even said it was the most important, more ancient than the great temple at Submerged, more potent than those in Corinth or Athens. For here, in this coastal plain cradled by olive groves and the breath of the sea, Poseidon was not merely honored, he ruled. The temple was aligned carefully to the stars. At solstice, the sun's first rays would fall between its columns and strike the altar at its core. In that moment, the god was said to open his eyes. Incense would burn. Chant would rise. Bulls, white and unblemished, were led to the altar and offered in the ancient rites, their blood mixed with wine, barley, and salt, a gift to the one who shaped earthquakes and summoned waves. The priests of Helike, robed in sea blue, faces lined with age and salt, tended the sanctuary like a heartbeat. They kept the oil lamps burning through the night. They read omens in the foam of the tide, in the way the birds circled, in the cracks that appeared in marble without warning. They knew the god was never still. And the people came, not just locals, but pilgrims from across the Achaean League, from islands scattered like pebbles across the Aegean. They came bearing gifts, carved shells from Delos, rings of amber from the north, coins minted in distant lands. Some came with prayers for safe voyages, for fertile harvests, for children. Others came in-eyed to stand before the image of Poseidon wrought in bronze, said to have eyes of obsidian and hands outstretched, as if forever holding back the sea. But the god's hands could not always hold. When the city fell, when the quake split stone and the sea rushed forward with its churning black veil, the temple was among the last to vanish. Witnesses in nearby towns spoke of watching it fall slowly, solemnly, its columns folding like reeds, its altar submerged in foam. The great bronze statue, dragged by water and debris, was said to groan as it sank, arms reaching skyward as if imploring the heavens. And then it was gone. No temple, no priest, only silence. But the memory endured. For centuries after, sailors reported strange sensations when crossing the waters where Helike once stood. Some claimed to see a glow in the deep faint greenish, like firelight glimpsed through mist. Others spoke of dreams that came only when anchored there, dreams of columns rising from the seabed, of chanting far below, of a god whose voice could still be heard beneath the waves. In the Roman era, Pliny the Elder wrote that during calm seas, the ruins of Helike may be seen beneath the water, with the temple of the sea god still intact, resting at the bottom of the sea like a crown upon his brow. Whether he saw it himself or repeated a legend, we do not know, but the story remained. The temple beneath the tide became a myth in its own right. In the Middle Ages, when maps became uncertain and the old gods gave way to new prayers, Helike's sanctuary became the stuff of legend. Local monks whispered of it during storms. Fishermen crossed themselves when sailing over certain parts of the Gulf. And still, sometimes, coins surfaced, always bearing the trident, always heavy with silence. Then, in the modern age, the ground spoke again. When Dora Katsonopoulos and her team began to uncover the buried city inland, they searched also for signs of the temple. It had to be near the city's core, near the coins, near the hearths and roads. But centuries of sediment made it difficult to locate. The river had moved. The coastline had shifted. Still, they pressed on. And then, one season, they found it. Only the base, at first a platform of large rectangular stones arranged in alignment with the cardinal points, broken fragments of column drums, marble flutes scattered like ribs, and at the center, a mound of rubble covering what appeared to be an altar base. It was not grand. Time had humbled it, but it was there, the sanctuary. Among the ruins were votive offerings, small terracotta figurines, bits of bronze, animal bones charred and buried as ritual. The altar itself, when carefully cleared, bore signs of intense heat, not just from offerings, but perhaps from the moment of destruction. Its surface was cracked, as if seared by something greater than fire. No statue remained, no inscriptions, only silence. And yet, the shape was unmistakable. It was a temple to Poseidon, and in its bones, it still breathed. Scientists studied the alignment, the construction techniques. The evidence pointed not only to the classical period, but 2 layers beneath. Suggesting this site had been sacred for centuries before Helike reached its height. Perhaps even in the Bronze Age, perhaps Poseidon's worship here went back further than writing itself. To stand at the ruined foundation was to feel the weight of continuity. It was a place where man and God met, where prayer was carved in stone, where the earth itself had opened in reply. Modern visitors come now, quiet. There are no tour buses, no marble restorations, just wind through reeds and signs in Greek and English describing what once was. Some kneel, some place shells upon the altar stone. Others simply close their eyes, imagining the columns rising again, the incense curling skyward, the chant of priests returning like waves. And still the sea lies just beyond the fields, its breadth never far. The temple beneath the tide has risen again, not in grandeur, but in truth, not to reclaim glory, but to remind us that beneath every city lies silence, and beneath silence, memory. High in the folds of Mount Parnassus, where the cliffs blush gold at dawn and the air carries the scent of laurel and prophecy, sat the sanctuary of There, the oracle spoke not in sentences, but in riddles, not in certainty, but in shadow. Her voice, veiled in vapor from the sacred chasm, guided kings, warned empires, and revealed the unseen currents beneath the surface of the world. It is said that before Helike fell, Delphi whispered. Of course, the nature of those whispers is lost to time. No scroll has preserved the precise words the Pythia spoke to the citizens of Helike, if indeed they ever sought her counsel. But fragments linger, like the echo of a breath between columns, hints that the gods, through Delphi's mouth, had given a warning, a murmur that something ancient stirred beneath the Achaean soil. In those days, cities came to Delphi not only in search of conquest or alliance, but for balance, to ask the gods, are we in harmony? Do our steps still match the rhythm of the stars? Offerings were brought in weighty, processions, gold, bronze, tripods, carved reliefs, and songs written in the Dorian mode. Perhaps Helike, proud and powerful, had grown deaf to that rhythm, or perhaps they had heard it, but misread the tempo. One account, obscure and half-arist, tells of an envoy from Helike who visited Delphi not long before the city's demise. They came not to seek warning, but to demand a blessing for expansion for a military expedition, or perhaps for the claim of more sea territory. The Pythia, wrapped in smoke and silence, answered not with encouragement, but with dread. The sea that feeds you will one day consume you. A curse, a metaphor, no one knows. But Delphi's words, as ever, carried weight. And when the sea did rise, and Helike vanished beneath it, those words took on the force of fate. Delphi understood the balance of the world as sacred. Earth, water, fire, and Aurora were threads in the same weave. To pull one too tightly was to tear the whole, and Poseidon, god of both sea and quaking ground, held two of those threads in his trident. A city devoted to him, like Helike, was bound by more than devotion. It was tethered by elemental pacts. Was the fall of Helike punishment, or was it simply nature's reply to a world out of tune? The oracle would never say. After Helike was lost, the legend reached Delphi swiftly. Priests and pilgrims spoke of it as a divine sign. Philosophers asked what it meant that the most devoted city of Poseidon had been drowned by the sea. Was it not a contradiction, or was it proof that no one, not even the faithful, was immune to imbalance? The sanctuary itself recorded nothing publicly, but within the temple, among the quiet scholars and stoneworkers, the name Helike was etched in quiet reverence, a memory held like a secret beneath layers of prophecy. In modern excavations at Delphi, no direct record of Helike has been uncovered, but pottery from Achaia has been found amphorae marked with symbols known to have originated near the Gulf of Corinth. And in the temple of Apollo, beneath layers of soot and marble dust, one bronze tablet was discovered, bearing a single line: "When the god of the sea walks the land, cities shall fall into silence." Was this a prophecy, a recollection, an echo of Helike's fate, or a warning of more to come? No one knows, but the line feels heavy, as if carrying the gravity of things already lost. In the centuries that followed, Delphi remained the navel of the world, the place where gods and mortals still met in mystery. But Helike's fate became part of the oracle's landscape. Travelers to the sanctuary began referencing it in their petitions. A sailor from Naxos, before departing to explore the western seas, asked the oracle if he would return safely. The answer: "Do not sleep where Helike dreams." A merchant from Corinth, seeking to build a port near the shifting delta, was told, "Stone remembers where waters passed." These were not simple answers. They were riddles, rooted in the deeper memory of the land. Even today, Delphi seems to remember. The ruins still hum with quiet tension. The wind through the cypress trees sounds almost like whispering. And if you stand by the temple at dusk, when the stones cast long shadows across the Pleistos Valley, you might feel that same pulse, that ancient murmur: balance. It is a word without edges, a state without permanence, a truth deeper than knowledge. Helike's tale, when told at Delphi, is not one of ruin alone. It is a parable of forgetting, of overreaching, of not hearing the wind when it changes, or the soil when it groans. The sanctuary's wisdom was never about answers, it was about listening. And so, the whispers of Delphi remain. They remind us that all cities, all empires, all lives, are threads woven into something vast. That to ignore the harmony of sea and stone, God and man, is to invite silence. In the next step of our journey, we follow that silence not into destruction, but into remembrance, into the stories carried by the people who survived, or who came later to walk the drowned plains. For even when the gods grow quiet, the earth remembers, and Delphi listens still. The story of Helike is often told as one without survivors, a city swallowed in a single night. No rescue, no remnant of its people, just silence, where there had been song. But history, like the sea, does not always surrender its truths at the surface. Sometimes, they lie deeper, scattered like driftwood on the far shores of memory. In the scrolls and chronicles that followed Helike's fall, there are no names preserved of those who fled, no lists of refugees, no record of mass burials or exiled citizens. The absence is so complete, it feels deliberate, as though the event were too heavy to bear in ink, as though it was not only a city that had been lost, but the voices that could name it. And yet, among the scattered ruins of nearby villages, archaeologists have found something unexpected. In layers dating just after the disaster, slightly higher in the soil, yet still ancient, there are signs of sudden growth. New dwellings, expanded granaries, hearths that had not been there before, pottery from Helike style appearing miles inland, away from the coast. These were not the markings of invasion, nor of slow expansion. They were signs of flight, of settlement by those who had come from somewhere else, suddenly, and built anew. From this, a quiet possibility emerges. Some escaped, not all, perhaps not many, but a few. People who had heard the early tremors, who had fled to the hills, who watched from olive-covered ridges as the wave claimed their city and their kin. And when the sea receded, they did not return. They moved inland, carrying with them only what they could hold. Children, perhaps. Tools. Fragments of their old gods. The memory of streets now buried in silt. They did not leave names, but they left traces. A spindle carved in the Helican style, found in a shepherd's hut far from the shore. A comb of bone, etched with wave patterns, unlike those of the local region. A cup, once used for libations, found buried beside a child's grave in an upland orchard. None of these objects are loud, but together, they whisper. We lived, we remembered, we did not forget. Among Greek traditions, there is a word. It means not just murder, but the killing of something sacred, something that disrupts the natural order. It must be cleansed, atoned for, restored to balance. And perhaps the survivors of Helike, unnamed and unrecorded, felt this rupture so deeply that they chose not to speak of it again. Instead, they began anew. Perhaps they founded the small villages that dot the hills around modern Archaeological places whose names carry no echo of Helike, and yet sit along the paths that fleeing feet might have taken. Perhaps the myths that later grew in the region of sea gods angered, of lights under the water, were carried by them, even as they never spoke the name aloud. To survive is not always to speak. Sometimes it is to bear. Helike's silence may be the echo of their burden. In folk songs collected in the 19th century from rural Greek villages, a curious stanza appears in more than one dialect. Passed from generation to generation, the sea came walking. No horse, no sail. It swallowed the lantern, the priest, the pail. But I held my child and ran to the pine, and never again crossed the water's line. No one knows its origin, but its rhythm is old, its image is clear. A sea that walks, a city extinguished, a parent, and the active flight survivors, without tombs, without chronicles, but not without presence. Today, as researchers trace the spread of Helican artifacts inland, they do so with reverence. They mapped not only the stones of the city, but the human wake it left behind. A wake invisible to rulers, to armies, to history's grand narrative, but not to memory. For Helike's soul may not reside only in the sunken temple, nor in the silver coins washed ashore, but in the hands that made new homes in quiet valleys, in lullabies that remember thunder without sky, in rituals performed without explanation, only the echo of necessity. Modern descendants may live in those towns today, unaware of the line they carry, the trident in their blood, the silence in their roots, the memory of streets beneath water, and of gods who do not always protect. Perhaps that is why no city was ever rebuilt upon Helike's exact ground. Perhaps those who remembered forbade it. Perhaps the land itself whispered, "Not here, not again." So the survivors scattered, like seed. And though we cannot name them, we can listen to the small signs in far-off, to the patterns in pottery, to the way the earth holds their absence. In this way they remain part of Helike's story, not lost but waiting, for the dreamer who pauses in the hills and hears the sea in the pine trees, for the historian who sees a pattern in clay, for the child who sings a song their grandmother never explained. In their silence, the survivors carry us deeper into the heart of the mystery, where history and memory no longer part ways, but meet, where names do not matter, only the breath that continues. Time forgets, but the earth remembers. It remembers not in words, nor in orderly lists, but in layers. Each grain of sand, each ribbon of sediment, each pocket of displaced stone, these are pages in a book without title, authored by flood, fire, and breath. In the case of Helike, the earth's memory was written in mud, thick, compacted, unyielding, at first glance yet filled with secrets. When the archaeologists descended upon the plains near Rizomillos and Kyrenia, they did not arrive with certainty. They came instead with questions, theories, fragments of hope. For centuries, others had searched for Helike beneath the waters of the Gulf. They had combed the seabed, scanned for ruins drowned beneath the tide, but the sea gave little. It shifted too much. It offered illusion, not clarity. The key lay not in the sea, but in the mud. Beneath the farmland and riverbanks, the mud held its silence, but it also held form strata of clay and silt that were not placed by weather alone. They held edges, depressions, faint traces of structure. They held pottery, discolored by centuries of burial, still carrying the fingerprints of the lost hands that shaped them. The mud was not chaos. It was memory. Dora Katsanopoulos and her team began to dig not by guessing, but by listening. Core samples were taken, drilled deep into the floodplain. Each sample pulled up a story. Fine layers of organic matter, then sand, then a thick blanket of gray-green clay unlike any deposited by slow erosion. This was not nature's gradual breath. It was sudden, violent. A layer laid down not over centuries, but in a single, furious night. Liquefaction, they called it, a seismic shift, combined with saturated soil, that transformed solid ground into sludge. The kind of event that causes buildings to sink, to tilt, to vanish. The kind of event that would explain a city gone without trace. And below that liquefied band, the past awaited. As trenches widened and levels were cleared, the team discovered not just artifacts but arrangements, foundation stones in linear order, broken walls following consistent angles, bronze coins clustered near doorways, amphorae still upright, protected by layers of mud that acted like a tomb. In one area, they found a collapsed structure where beams had fallen in on themselves, burned, then soaked. Carbon dating confirmed the approximate time. Late in the 4th century BCE, it was Helike. But it was not only a city they found. It was a moment, preserved, encased in silence, as though the mud had not only buried the structures, but sealed in the breath of the city's last day. Excavators recall an uncanny stillness as they worked. No matter how many artifacts they retrieved, no scattered bones, No massive debris flung outward by a fleeing populace. The city had not died in riot or fire, it had simply stopped, like a candle extinguished under glass. And yet, through the mud, memory spoke. The way a coin lay atop a tile fragment suggested a purse dropped in haste. A wall with missing stones hinted at an attempted repair. Unfinished, a staircase, leading downward, abruptly ending in collapse, told of someone descending, perhaps never to return. The archaeologists, though trained to remain objective, could not help but feel the intimacy of it. This was not distant history. This was daily life, paused. The mud preserved more than stone and metal. It preserved emotion, the absence of sound, the absence of continuation. In one trench, they discovered a series of child-sized footprints embedded in hardened silt lighting from one wall to another. The soil had captured the last steps before it turned to liquid. The impressions were small, barefoot wandering, perhaps playing, perhaps fleeing. They led nowhere. In that stillness, modern hands reached back and touched the ghost of a moment, and the mud so long maligned as formless became the very form of memory. Scientists today call the Helike event a perfect geological storm. A shallow fault line, high water tables, sediment-prone soil, and a violent quake at precisely the wrong or right moment. But the language of science, precise and elegant, cannot capture what the mud preserved, the breath of a vanished world. To stand at the excavation site is to kneel at the altar of time. No temples remain upright. No statues rise above the reeds. But the earth still holds their outlines. Every trench, every scoop of trowel, is a dialogue. The archaeologists call it but in another sense, it is archaeology of silence, of tracing the curve of a shattered bowl to the rhythm of a forgotten meal, of reading the lean of a wall as testimony to the last wind it felt, of finding beauty not in the grandeur of survival, but in the humility of loss. Mud and memory, they are twin forces. One swallows, the other speaks, and when they meet, when we listen not just with tools, but with our history, awakens not in dates, but in breath. As we move toward the final arc of Helike's story, we will journey through how its rediscovery has shaped modern understanding not only of ancient cities, but of our own for what the mud buries. It also protects, and sometimes, the earth chooses to remember. Beneath the waters of the Gulf of Corinth, the past lingers in strange ways, not always in the form of ruins or relics, but in sensations, a change in pressure, a flicker of light, a sense, inexplicable yet persistent, that something waits below. For centuries, mariners and fishermen sailing across the Gulf whispered of oddities near the site where Helike had once stood. On nights when the sea lay unnaturally calm, they claimed to glimpse faint outlines beneath the surface, grids of stone, circular formations, darker shapes resting beneath the shimmer of moonlight. Some dismissed these as tricks of water and light. Others listened. They said the sea spoke, low humming, echoes like voices underwater, a feeling that the deep was not empty, but filled with something listening in return. Not haunting, exactly, but aware, as if the sea itself had memorized the shape of the drowned city and could still replay its contours and sound. Ancient sources captured this unease. Pliny the Elder wrote that Helike could be seen beneath the sea on quiet days, as if preserved like a statue in a glass case. Pausanias, the Greek traveler of the 2nd century CE, confirmed the location of the vanished city and the strangeness surrounding it. He noted that fishermen sometimes caught strange-shaped bronze things in their nets, likely fragments of votive offerings or building adornments, and yet no one dared dive deeply. It wasn't until the modern age that those whispers gained form. In the mid-20th century, long before Katsonopoulos's team redirected the search inland, a number of underwater expeditions attempted to locate Helike directly beneath the sea. Sonar scans revealed anomalies, irregular features on the seafloor that looked like walls or foundations. Divers brought up shroods of pottery, broken statuary bases, even large worked stones now covered in marine growth, but nothing conclusive, nothing whole. It was as though the sea was offering only fragments, hints, messages, and still, the questions deepened. Why did so many ancient sources speak of Helike's ruins being visible beneath the sea for centuries after the disaster? Why did the sea continue to draw attention to itself, long after the city had sunk and been forgotten by name? In 2001, geophysical surveys conducted near the coastal shelf of the Corinthian Gulf revealed fault scarps, deep underwater drops caused by tectonic activity. These findings supported the idea that an underwater landslide, triggered by a massive earthquake, may have caused a sudden localized tsunami, the wave that destroyed Helike. Further evidence pointed to underwater liquefaction, shifting the land so quickly it opened sinkholes, capable of pulling entire structures into the deep. In these layers of water, earth, and silence, Helike wrote its last letters, not with ink, but with displacement, and perhaps with sound. Underwater archaeologists, using submersible audio equipment, noted low-frequency vibrations in certain areas of the Gulf. While likely geological in nature, the phenomena were peculiar. They occurred at irregular intervals, sometimes silent for days, then humming low and constant for hours. To the sensitive ear, it sounded almost like chanting, not language, but rhythm. What are we hearing when we listen to the deep seismic tension, tectonic breathing, or memory? Perhaps the sea does more than forget. Perhaps it contains remembrance in fluid form, not in the way we tell stories, but in the way currents remember temperature and tides recall the pull of distant moons. Helike may have disappeared in a single night, but it has not stopped speaking. The messages come not only through scientific instruments or ancient texts, they come through sensation, through intuition, through the dreams of those who live near the water. There are stories, modern ones, of villagers who dream of a city at night, white and gleaming beneath a blue sun, of doors that open into water, of bronze statues whose eyes follow without malice. Children have drawn images of tridents, though no one has taught them the symbol. Elders tell tales of a city that once betrayed the sea and was gently These are not data points. They are messages from the deep, from the place beneath time, where memory is not yet language, from the broken steps of the temple of Poseidon, now home to coral and current, from the coins that continue to wash ashore, unspoken testimonies in the palm of a hand, from the seaweed curling over the outline of a road no longer walked, and most of all, from the silence. For the deepest messages are not those shouted across centuries, but those whispered in stillness. A city, a lesson. Helike, even in its ruin, continues to speak not in sentences, but in symbols. As we move now into the final arc of this journey, we begin to reflect not only on what was lost, but on what remains. What Helike teaches not only about the past, but about the way we live now on shifting ground, beneath uncertain skies, beside seas that remember. For in the quiet pulses of the deep, something waits. Not horror, but wisdom. In the world of the ancients, balance was not simply a concept, it was a law. Older than the gods, woven into the breath of the cosmos. Sea and stone, sky and root, fire and shadow all moved in accordance with one another. Each thing had its place, its purpose, and when one grew too bold, too heavy, the others would rise to restore equilibrium. Helike's story is the story of this balance, a city that thrived because of the sea and perished by it, a city that worshipped the god of oceans in earthquakes, and yet fell to the very forces it revered. It is no irony, it is no punishment, it is a pattern, one so ancient it does not need morality to be understood. Sea and stone must remain in balance. Helike stood on fertile ground, flat, open claws to the water, fed by the Selinus River and blessed by trade winds. It prospered because of this placement. The harbor brought goods, the land yielded harvest, the sea offered fish and connection, but such bounty was not guaranteed. It came with weight. Stone is fixed, sea is changed. Together they must move like dancers, each aware of the other's rhythm. But Helike in time forgot to listen. It paved its roads with confidence. It built its temple larger. It minted its god on coin. It assumed, as civilizations often do, that stability is something that can be owned. But the sea never belongs to us, and the stone beneath our feet is never truly still. Modern science confirms what ancient wisdom intuited. The Achaean coast rests on a fragile line where tectonic plates breathe and resist, where one slip, one sigh from the mantle can undo centuries in minutes. The very fertility of the land, the openness of the plain, was the result of these shifting forces built by the same geology that would one day unravel it. To live on the edge of sea and stone is to dwell within a paradox. One must hold both gratitude and caution. One must reap in respect. Helike did not fall because it was evil or arrogant. It fell because it grew too still in a place that required motion, too confident in permanence where impermanence was sacred. In our modern world, we build on coasts, on deltas, on soft soil and shifting silt. We build towers against tide, walls against waves. We write contracts and draw maps. We forget, as Helike once did, that the world does not read our documents. It moves according to older terms. And yet, the story of Helike is not a scolding. It is a reflection. It shows us what happens when we drift too far from harmony, when we forget that the sea is not a line on a map, but a living force. That stone, while still in our hands, moves beneath them. And most of all, it reminds us that reverence must not only live in temples, it must live in action. The people of Helike prayed to Poseidon. They offered sacrifice. They inscribed his symbol on their currency. But perhaps they stopped listening to the deeper rhythms. Perhaps the rituals became habit. Perhaps their respect became routine. And the balance was lost. Not in a moment. Not by a single act. But gradually, subtly, until the sea remembered what the people had forgotten. In the ruins unearthed by modern archaeologists, this tension is visible. Streets too close to flood zones. Foundations resting on soil that was never meant to hold stone. Temples rebuilt without adjusting for shifts in the water table. Signs that the balance, once known, had been neglected. The lessons are not only for geologists or historians, they are for all who dwell on the edges of great forces. Helike whispers, do not mistake silence for safety. Do not confuse ritual for reverence, and never assume the sea is done speaking. In the broader arc of human history, Helike is not alone. Pompeii fell to fire, Akrotiri to Ashdorka to the rising tide. Cities have always danced with disaster, but the ones we remember truly remember are those whose fall speaks beyond time. Helike does not scream. It does not preach. It hums softly beneath the soil and the surf, a song of balance. In the end, that may be its greatest gift. Not its tragedy, but its tuning fork. To live rightly with the sea, we must move like the sea. To live rightly upon stone, we must listen to its pulse. Balance is not stillness. It is rhythm. It is knowing when to build and when to pause, when to anchor and when to drift. Helike reminds us of this rhythm, and in doing so, offers not only a story of loss but a guide to continuance. As we move forward into the closing chapters, we will look at what Helike offers to the world today, how its story, once buried, is reshaping our understanding of place, of presence, of our fragile arrangement with the living earth. For the sea still raises, the stone still shifts, and the balance still sings. In the olive silver hills of Achaia, the past is never far. It lingers in the curve of the land, in the rhythm of cicadas at dusk, in the way villagers paused when they speak of the sea. The earth is older than history here, and yet history breathes just beneath the surface, waiting to be stirred, remembered, honored. The rediscovery of Helike in the late 20th century did more than awaken the academic world. It stirred something deeper in the soul of modern Greece, a country already steeped in the memory of ruins, but rarely one so complete in its silence. For Helike had not crumbled through time like the Parthenon or the temples at Delphi. It had vanished, and to bring it back, even in pieces, was to perform an act of resurrection. Locals in the villages surrounding the excavation site often speak of the city with awe. Some visit the dig sites regularly, not as tourists but as witnesses. They bring offerings, olive branches, small coins, poems written in notebooks. Children are brought to watch the archaeologists work, their eyes wide not with confusion, but wonder. They are told, this is where the sea came. This is where a city once slept. In classrooms, Helike has found a new place in the national curriculum. Teachers use it to explain not only ancient history, but seismology, geography, and mythology. It becomes a crossroad for disciplines, a point where poetry meets plate tectonics and ethics touches architecture. Students are encouraged to ask why cities rise and fall, what choices led to their prosperity, what silence preceded their undoing. For a nation perched on fault lines, Helike is no mere story. It is a mirror. Greece today faces many of the same questions that Helike did, though dressed in modern form: coastal development, seismic risk, ecological balance. The same tremors rumble beneath the feet of new buildings, the same sea presses against expanding harbors. And now, with Helike's bones exposed, there is a quiet call to listen more deeply. Urban planners from Patras and Corinth have visited the excavation site, considering how the lessons from 373 BCE might shape safer, more sustainable design today. Engineers have studied the soil composition around Helike to better understand how liquefaction can destroy foundations. Local municipalities have begun to map their histories not only with dates and legends, but with strata and sediment. Helike is no longer just ancient history. It is caution and inspiration. Artists have responded to. Sculptors have carved bronze tridents that twist and blur into waves. Painters have depicted the city rising like breath from beneath the sea. Musicians have composed pieces using deep, resonant drones to evoke the sea's long memory. One contemporary Greek composer created a movement titled Poseidon's Pause, blending seismic data translated into sound with ancient lyre harmonies. In the town of Aegian, a museum is in the works, one dedicated to Helike's story, not a place of spectacle, but of contemplation. It will include artifacts of coarse coins, pottery, tools, but also the soil cores, the sonar scans, the voices of the archaeologists who pulled the past from beneath the fields. At the heart of the exhibit is planned a quiet chamber, a dark room with projections of underwater ruins and soft echoes of waves. No words, just immersion. Because Helike is not a tale to be told quickly, it is one to enter slowly, to breathe in, like brine-sweet air before a storm. Beyond Greece, the resonance of Helike has begun to ripple outward. In Japan, earthquake scholars cite the city when discussing tsunami resilience. In Italy, urban developers exploring ancient cities beneath Naples study Helike's preservation to guide careful excavation. In the United States, climate change researchers use it as a metaphor for coastal fragility. Articles have appeared in international journals with titles like The Silence of Helike and Memory in the Mud. For a city once forgotten, Helike now whispers around the world. But its truest resonance remains local. It lies in a way an old farmer tilling the land near pauses when his plow hits stone, and instead of frustration, he feels reverence. It lies in the way school children trace the trident on their sketch pads, not just as an emblem of the sea, but as a symbol of something ancient and enduring. It lies in the conversations between seismologists and historians, architects and poets, each bringing their lens to the city that vanished, each hearing a different part of its voice. And it lies in the rhythm of Greek life itself, which has always danced between memory and motion. Helike does not stand like Athens, It does not tower like Delphi, but it resonates quietly, steadily, like a low note held beneath the melody of modernity. It is a hum in the soil, a city still present, not in skyline, but in soul. As we drift toward the close of our journey, we will explore what Helike means to all of us, not just as a historical event, but as a timeless parable of balance, of humility, and of listening to the ground beneath our feet. For what modern Greece remembers, the world may yet learn, and in the silence of Helike something eternal continues to rise. Not all cities fall with fire. Some vanish into quiet, into silt, into the long breath of the earth, holding something close. Helike did not burn like Troy, it did not crumble in war like Mycenae, it did not fade with the slow attrition of time. It was taken, and then it waited. For centuries Helike lingered just beyond reach, not in the depths of imagination, but in the shallows of reality. Not myth, but memory. Submerged, and it waited not in anger, nor in mourning, but in stillness, as if the very land understood that to speak too soon would be to be misheard. The city waited for listeners, and when they came slowly. A farmer's spade, a child's story, a coin surfacing in a furrowed field, a breath of bronze in the soil. But even before the archaeologists, before the sonar and the journals and the published maps, the city spoke. It spoke in dreams. Villagers along the Gulf of Corinth told stories, quiet ones, kept by grandmothers, and night, of strange lights flickering over fields after rainfall, of paths that seemed to lead nowhere, but felt old, of distant footsteps heard at dawn. And sometimes the sea brought fragments, a shard of black-laced pottery, a piece of coral-encrusted tile, a bronze ring in the stomach of a caught fish. The city was not gone. It had simply gone, still, like a breath held in the space between storms. The philosopher Plotinus once said that souls do not perish, they withdraw, until called forth again. Perhaps Helike was the same. Not a ruin, but a soul. Not destroyed, but dormant. And in that dormancy there was clarity. The city became more than its stones. It became a reflection, a question, a hush in the back of the mind whenever one walks too close to the edge of the sea. What is permanent? What is earned? What is remembered? For 23 centuries Helike waited beneath mud and memory, but when it finally re-emerged, it did so not with triumph, but with grace. No grand towers, just soft earth yielding to careful hands, just footprints still pressed into clay, just the weight of silence lifted gently, layer by layer. And with it came a kind of humility, the kind that comes only from waiting, from being patient while the world forgets, from trusting that someone, someday, will return not just to dig but to understand. The archaeologists who unearthed Helike often speak of the sight in reverent tones. They describe how even the stones seem to sit differently in the hand, how the walls feel as though they are listening as much as they are revealing. There is a presence to the place, a pulse, as if the city itself remembers. And perhaps that is what makes Helike different from other ancient places. It did not ask to be found. It did not offer itself as spectacle. It simply waited for someone to arrive with stillness, with silence enough to hear its story. In this, Helike teaches us more than any textbook can. It teaches that not all loss is absence, that not all ruin is the end, that what waits beneath our feet may one day return not as it was, but as it is meant to be. A voice rising from quiet. As we near the final steps of our journey, we prepare to listen to Helike's last message. One not of death, but of remembrance. One not of disaster, but of continuity. The city waited, and we are finally ready to hear. Every lost city lives in two forms. The first lies in stone and soil, what was built, what was broken, what was buried. The second lives in us, in the dreamers, in the ones who imagine the light in the windows, the laughter in the square, the hush of sandals on worn stone. One is drowned, the other, dreaming. Helike is both. The city, in its physical truth, vanished on a night of trembling earth and rising water. The streets were silenced. The temple fell. The people faded. And for centuries, the world passed by the place where it had once stood, unaware of the memory just beneath their feet. But Helike, in its dreaming form, never left. It drifted from generation to generation in whispers, legends, and the quiet haunt of what might have been. It became a symbol, not of destruction, but of mystery, of possibility. A city not consumed, but concealed. For the dreamer, Helike is never entirely gone. It waits in the morning mist that rolls over ancient fields, in the curve of an old riverbed, in the slow erosion of a wall whose purpose has been forgotten, but whose stones still lean toward one another, as if remembering a doorway long vanished. In every generation there are those who feel the tug, the child who stares at the horizon a little longer than the others, the old man who stops mid-tale, as if listening to something just out of reach, the woman who walks alone by the coast and pauses, unsure why her breath is caught in her throat. These are the dreamers. They carry Helike not as fact, but as feeling, as resonant, as the knowing that there are places too quiet to be forgotten, and too powerful to be remembered only through maps. The drowned city and the dreamer form a pact. One lies beneath, the other listens above. And when the two meet, when a story once buried is given voice, when a place long lost is found again through reverent eyes, the sea yields. The stone sighs, and memory becomes more than myth. This bond between the drowned and the dreamer is not unique to it is the very heart of human connection to the past. It's the same bond that binds us to the ruins of Petra half lost in the cliffs, to the forest-covered pyramids of Mesoamerica, to the shadows of Mohenjo-Daro beneath the desert sun. Each place was built, was lost, and now waits not only to be found, but to be felt. But Helike's dream feels closer, perhaps because it was never meant to be lost for so long, perhaps because its voice is quieter, more intimate, not a roar, but a ripple. In 2007, a young Greek student visiting the Helike dig site wrote in her notebook, "I feel like I'm not standing where something ended, but where something still is. I keep expecting to see someone walk out from the trench and smile at me, not a ghost, just someone who knows I'm here." She had not seen a statue. She had not read a plaque, but she had heard the dream. And that is what keeps Helike alive. The drowned city teaches us that memory is not passive. It requires presence. The presence of those who listen without rushing, of those who seek without plunder, of those who understand that what was lost may not wish to be reclaimed in stone, but in spirit. Helike will never be rebuilt. It will not rise again in the form it once knew. But it does not need to. It rises every time someone pauses beside the shore and imagines what once stood there. Every time a child draws waves and wonders what lies beneath. Every time a name nearly forgotten passes through the lips of someone who was never taught it but feels it all the same. The drowned city does not want monuments. It wants memory. And the dreamer does not seek answers. They seek connection. Together, they form something ancient and sacred. A dialogue across time. A breathing place between silence and sound. As we move toward the end of this journey, Helike becomes less a location and more a state of mind. A way of seeing. A way of listening. A way of dreaming. Even in the face of what has gone beneath. The sea takes, but sometimes it also returns, not in the form it swallowed, not as restitution, but as echo, as drift, as fragments softened by salt and time, returned not to those who lost them, but to those willing to listen. Helike was claimed by the sea in a single, merciless breath, a surge of black water, a trembling earth, and then silence. But in the centuries that followed, the sea gave back not all at once, and never entirely but in whispers. A coin in a fisherman's net, a column drum on a quiet dive, a pattern in the seabed traced by sonar, a story remembered without knowing where it began. This, too, is a kind of generosity. The sea does not forget, it holds, and then, when the time is right, it begins to uncoil its long memory. Along the shores of the Gulf of Corinth, small offerings continue to arrive, pottery shards that glint beneath waves at low tide, stones etched with strange lines, carried in by the surf, bronze that resists corrosion just long enough to remind us it was once part of something sacred. Modern divers, searching for remnants of Helike, sometimes describe an eerie familiarity to the seafloor, not ruins, exactly, not clear columns or pathways, but suggestions, right angles and stone clusters, smooth edges where none should be, pockets of quiet where fish do not gather, as if the sea remembers the shape of what once stood there, even after reshaping it in its own image. And sometimes, it gives back more than objects. It gives back the feeling. There are people who say they have felt something out there not haunting, but presence, a pressure in the chest, a stillness in the current, a sense that you are being watched, not by eyes, but by memory. You stand in the water and the water remembers. This return is not physical alone, it is emotional, cultural, symbolic. In recent years, communities along the Achaean coast have begun integrating Helike into their rituals not as tragedy, but as remembrance. On certain evenings, candles are floated in the water in silence, not for mourning, but for continuity. The sea, once a force of loss, becomes a channel of offering. Some offer poems, some bring stones, others simply stand with bare feet in the surf, watching the waves move in and out, knowing they are part of the same rhythm. What the sea gives back is not only the past, it is awareness, that we are always building our lives beside something older than language, that beneath every quiet beach may lie a city, that even the gods once worshipped may rise again not in form, but in feeling. The Helike project itself, led by Dora Katsanopoulos and others, has evolved from an excavation into something deeper, a collaboration between science and spirit. Their work no longer asks only what happened, but why we remember. The artifacts they uncover are not just catalogued, they are contemplated, because each one is a message, a gesture. The sea gives back, not as a ledger, but as a whisper. The more gently we ask, the more generously it responds. And perhaps, in the deepest places, the sea gives back something even more rare than ruins wisdom. A sense of scale, of humility, of placement, that we are not above the earth or the water, but part of it, that the cities we build, the temples we raise, the stories we write all must flow within the current, not against it. Helike reminds us that nothing we create is guaranteed to remain, but also that nothing is ever truly lost. As long as we remember, as long as we listen, as long as we stand beside the sea, not as masters but as kin. The final chapter of this journey approaches, where Helike will offer her last message not in stone or in storm, but in the stillness that follows, in the quiet understanding that what the sea once gave, it may one day give again, and what we hold now is not possession, but stewardship, of memory, of balance, of the silence between waves. There is a moment that follows every storm, not triumph, not despair to stillness. The sea breathes again, the wind forgets its sharpness, the earth ceases to tremble, and in that stillness something sacred unfolds. This is where Helike now lives, not in the violence of its fall, not even in the fragments unearthed by careful hands, but in what followed. In the centuries of silence, in the memory that outlived ruin, in the soft hum that remains when the world has stopped speaking, the stillness after. We often focus on what was lost: the temple, the coins, the people, but Helike's deeper legacy lies in what endured. The space it left in the landscape, the reverence it seeded in the minds of poets and pilgrims, the way it reshaped how we listen to the earth. It is this stillness, not emptiness, but presence, that lingers most. When you walk along the shore near where Helike once stood, there is no city to see, no statues rising, no agora buzzing with life, only reeds, slow water, distant mountains, and the scent of salt in the air. Yet, if you are still enough, if you stand and wait, without expectation, you might feel it, that breath beneath a world, that pulse beneath the soil. It is not Helike calling out, it is memory itself. The city's story, now unearthed and told, is not just about collapse, it's about listening. The world trembled, the sea rose, but we returned. We asked, we brushed back the dust, we listened, and that listening changed us. Helike is no longer forgotten. It is watched, honored, studied, loved. Its silence has become a guide. In this stillness, we are asked to reflect. How many other places lie waiting? Not just cities but truths, not just ruins but reminders, that everything we build, every wall we raise, every name we etch into stone must one day be weighed by time and tide. That reverence is not about what we preserve, but how we relate to land, to memory, to the fragile pact we keep with the natural world. Helike offers no condemnation, no final warning carved into its ruins. It simply is. A city once proud, now quiet, a name once buried, now spoken, now found not only on maps, but in meaning, and the stillness it left behind. It is not the silence of death, it is the pause before understanding. As you come to the end of this journey, perhaps you carry something new, a sense of how the past lingers, a respect for what lies beneath the surface, a gentler way of walking across the ground. For every city leaves a shadow, every stone a whisper, every sea a memory. And Helike's stillness, now heard at last, is not a silence to fear but to follow. So pause, listen, and carry its quiet wisdom with you into your own tides. And now, dear dreamer, our journey returns to silence. We have wandered through the folds of forgotten time, walked amongst stones once held by living hands, and listened to the breath of a city that vanished into the sea's long memory. Helike lost remembered, awakened has spoken, not in shouts but in whispers, not in monuments but in murmurs beneath the reeds. We followed the trident's path, from silver coins in the soil, to tremors beneath bare feet, to the stillness that teaches more than any ruin ever could. We stood beside Poseidon's fallen altar. We watched as mud became memory. We traced dreams passed from child to elder, in voices that never forgot, even when they had no words to name what they knew. And now, the sea rests again, not tamed, not changed, but heard. Let us leave this place gently. Let the quiet of Helike settle upon your thoughts like soft dust on old stone. Let the waves of her story wash slowly over your sleep. Let the balance of sea and stone become your rhythm, your breath, your stillness. If this journey has found a home within you, return when you wish. The city will still be here, waiting as it always has. Before you drift away into dream, dear traveler, leave a trace for others to find, a gentle, like a whispered subscription to our circle of listeners, so the voices of the past may continue to echo, soft and unbroken. And tell us, if you wish, from where in the waking world you've joined this dream, so that we may draw our constellation of listeners across oceans and time zones. Until we meet again in the mist of memory, sleep well, dream deep, and may the sea always whisper gently in return.